Alright tubes, got something pretty interesting here for today. We're going to be working on my green truck, and I have a particular issue here which is really applicable to any vehicle. This isn't just a Ford video, this isn't just a truck video, this is pretty much any vehicle that has a battery. The problem I'm having is that my terminals, mainly just due to age, perhaps a little bit due to corrosion, but mainly age, have worn out, and actually one of them is actually broken. It's snapped at the base, and what that has resulted in is, even with the bolt as tight as it can physically get, the terminal itself is loose and just basically pops right off. The positive is okay, but I figured if I'm going to replace one, I might as well replace both, and that is exactly what I'm going to show you guys how to do today. In order to complete this job, we shouldn't need too many tools at all. I've basically got 3 tools here I'm anticipating needing. I've got a nut driver here, which we will use to remove our original battery terminals. On my particular truck, on the Ranger, it's an 8mm. It might be a different size on your vehicle, but whatever it is, you'll need a wrench to get your old battery terminal off. We've got a set of hefty wire cutters here. These will be used to cut the cables and get rid of our old terminals. And then last but not least, I've got a little razor blade here, and I'm going to use this to strip my wires. Then of course we have our actual terminals themselves. I picked up this set of terminals on Amazon. I think shipped to my door they cost me 15 bucks, and in my opinion they're a really nice set of terminals. I'll put a link down into the description if you guys want to check these out. But they're I can't tell if they're aluminum or some kind of plated steel, but whatever they're machined out of, they did a great job. They're really nice hardware. And what's nice about these, number one, they include these little copper shims here, and you use one on your negative, but you don't use one on your positive cable. And then you have the option here for a number of different wire sizes. You have 2 larger ones out here. I think you could do O-gauge wire. If you take these round brass shims out, you can, or bushings, you can actually remove those and get an even larger wire. Or if you're using, I guess, I don't know if that's 2-gauge, 4-gauge, whatever the smaller size is, you could just leave those bushings in there and you're good to go. Same deal with these inner ones here. You could do 2 different size wires. And what's nice about that is, like on my particular truck, I have more than 1 wire, so this is really nice. I can install the 2 factory wires from my truck, as well as the accessory wires that I have running to it. So these are great. Oh, not only that, they come with these little plastic covers. There's 3 little tabs on the corners here, and they keep those covers snapped on. So what's nice about that is you're working on the truck, or you get one tightened, you don't have to worry about shorting your wrench out and burning the whole truck down doing the other. And they also were generous enough to include Allen wrenches for all your adjustments here. So not bad for 15 bucks. And once again, I will place a link to those down in the description for anyone who may be interested if you're doing this job. So once you've got all your tools ready to rock and roll here, the first step is going to be to simply remove our old terminals from the battery here. Once again, I'm using an 8mm. Depending on your particular vehicle, it may be larger, maybe smaller, it may be American. In either case, you'll remove your terminals. This one is so far gone I don't even have to loosen it. And then we can take a look at our wires here and see exactly what's going on here. Now what I've done here, just for demonstration's sake, is I actually cut the shrink tubing off of here, just so you guys can see the way this was done from the factory. And again, this may vary depending on your vehicle. You may have more wires or potentially fewer wires running up to your terminal, in which case this will be even easier. But on my particular vehicle, I have 2, and what they did is they just put the 2 wires together and then crimp them into the terminal. Now what we're going to do is, since our new terminals actually have the ability to accept multiple wires, we're going to cut these wires off individually, and then we'll be able to install them into their respective spots on the new terminal. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to take my wire cutters and try and cut these wires. We want to leave them as long as possible, although sometimes it gets difficult to get your cutters in super close to the terminals. So that's pretty good there. So we'll go ahead, we'll snip this one, and we'll cut the other one so it's just about the same length. And then we also have my accessory wire that I've added here for my light bar and various other implements of destruction. So we will go ahead and chop that off. Next, we're going to go and repeat the same thing for our negative terminal here, and I'm actually going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut the shrink tubing off again, and the reason that I'm doing this is that I can actually get in a little bit closer and leave a little extra slack when I cut my terminals here. Once we have our terminals out of the way, we can go ahead and install our new ones. And the reason we're going to do this step next is we want to try and put as little stress as possible on these wires. So rather than attach the wires and then bend and twist them into place to get them onto the batteries, it's better to start with the terminals on the batteries where they're going to be, and then we can just bring the wires to where they naturally want to go. And once again, we have these little copper shims inside of the terminals here, and they're included in both, but you actually only use them on one terminal. On my particular truck, I actually found that I needed to use both shims on the negative. With just one shim, I couldn't get the terminal all the way tight. So what I've done is I've actually taken both shims, installed them on this negative terminal, and now even without the bolt tightened, it's quite solid on there. So we'll go ahead, we can tighten it down now. It's going to be an Allen wrench on the one side here, and then a good old-fashioned 14mm wrench on the other. Alrighty, now next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and get our wires stripped so we can attach them into our terminals here. As I mentioned before, they do sell wire strippers for large gauge wires, but unfortunately I don't have one, and I figure there's a relatively good chance you may not have one either. So instead of doing that, we're going to use a razor blade. Originally I did show that I was going to use one of these razor blades, just free, not attached to a handle like this, but I decided that it's a lot better to use one in a handle. The reason being is that cutting through this insulation can be kind of tough, and you got to put a decent amount of pressure on the blade, particularly if your blade is dull. But anyway, in terms of actually stripping the wires here, it's a relatively simple concept. Basically all we need to do is we need to cut the insulation in a complete circle, and the key word here is complete. Once you make it all the way around, that it actually meets where you started. But once we're done that, we can more than likely just pull the insulation right off. Now as you cut through the wire, it's usually relatively easy to feel once you've made it all the way through the insulation. You'll feel it almost feels like you're cutting through something rough, and that's the blade rubbing up against the copper. And so once you reach that point, you don't want to cut anymore. Our goal here is to just cut the insulation, not cut any of the copper. And I mean, as you can see here, it's already starting to work its way off, so we should, with a little twist in here and maybe a little spinning, it should come right off. You can see I stripped about a 1/4 inch of insulation, maybe a little more, maybe closer to a 1/2 inch. But that should be perfect. I think the wire is going to go exactly the correct depth into the terminal, such that it bottoms out and gets fully clamped down by the bolt, but also we don't have any exposed wire sticking out the outside. So now we can go ahead and repeat the same process for our thicker wire here. Now, once we've got both our wires stripped here, the final step of the job is just to install both wires into the terminal. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to use both the supplied Allen wrenches. We got the larger one and the smaller one. The larger one is going to be for our bigger wires here, and then the smaller one fits into the smaller here. Now, as we mentioned before, what the goal here is to try and let this wire just go exactly where it wants to fall without having to force it into place. That way we strain the wire as little as possible. And it looks to me like this is probably going to be the best one, this outside one. So as you can see, I already loosened up the screw here, so it's simply a matter of holding the wire in there. Now we can just tighten this down. And we want to go relatively tight here. We definitely do not want this wire coming out. I think that should be tight enough. And then we'll just repeat the same for our smaller wire here. So tighten this down. And that feels pretty good to me. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that the other bolts are tight here. That way we don't have to worry about any of them vibrating out. Looks good. Go ahead and install our plastic cover here. And we are officially done with side number 1. Now, for the most part, we're basically just going to repeat the same process for the positive side. The only exception being is that in this case we actually have 3 wires. One thing that I did want to show you guys, in the event that you were dealing with a vehicle that has some gauge wire larger than the ones that we're dealing with here, or in other words, one that's too large to fit in here. All you need to do here is you need to take your bolt all the way out, and then you just pull out this little bushing here, and all this bushing does is it takes up some of the extra space. So if you have a smaller wire like this particular truck does, it fits in there tight. However, if you have the larger wire, all you do is remove this bushing, you got all the space you need. So let's get started on our positive here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and tighten our terminal up the rest of the way here. I kept it loose just for demonstrations purposes. So we got that nice and tightened up, no shims required, and now we can get started with stripping our wire. Now here's a pro tip for you guys. Some of you guys might have picked up on this. I actually made a mistake while I did this job. I ended up doing the negative first, followed by the positive. But really, it's a good idea anytime you're working with battery terminals, whether you're replacing them, removing them, changing your battery, whatever. It's a good idea to always remove your negative terminal first. And the reason for this is very straightforward. You want to avoid accidentally creating a short circuit between the two terminals of the battery. Now the most obvious way that this can happen, which you may have done accidentally before in the past, is if you touch these two terminals together, whether it's with a wrench, a screwdriver, whatever tools you may be working with. If you touch these two terminals together, you get a big spark, and you don't want that. Well, another way that that can occur is if you actually touch a wrench from this positive terminal to really any part of the chassis that's grounded. And the reason being is that, assuming we're working with a negative ground vehicle, the negative, or the ground post of the battery, is actually attached to the chassis. That's how a ground works. And so if you touch this positive to any point on the chassis, you're essentially doing the same things you would be doing if you were to touch a screwdriver from here to here. So the point being is, if you remove your negative terminal before putting a wrench on your positive terminal, then you don't have to worry about that. But that's really all there is to it. So if you do this job, not only when you first take your terminals off, should you really take your negative off, you should actually put your positive on. When you actually go to replace the terminal, you should actually put your positive on first. But anyway, beyond that little extra piece of advice for you guys there, I don't think I have anything else for you. We got a very fine looking set of terminals on here now. I really like these plastic covers. They're a nice extra touch. I think for 15 bucks this was the best option you could get. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you are unsure of anything, or you have any additional questions that haven't been answered yet, feel free to put them down in the comment section. I will try to get back to you guys as quickly as possible. As always, if you liked what you saw in the video here, please consider subscribing. That will really help me out. Give me a thumbs up, and check the description for links to these particular battery terminals. Like I say, they're on Amazon. They're about 15 bucks. I don't think there's a better option out there, so feel free to get yourselves a set. Until the next one, see you guys later. There he goes.